Day 412 in a war where the death toll has now passed 44,000. And the International Criminal Court today issued a landmark arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Minister of Defense Yoav Galant, along with a now deceased Hamas leader. It's the first time the ICC has issued arrest warrants against a major U.S. ally. It is worth noting the U.S. and Israel are not signatories to the ICC. The world's highest criminal court, which is made up of 124 countries, including all 27 members of the European Union, is now saying that if Galant or Netanyahu set foot in the territory of a state party, that state party has an obligation to arrest them and transfer them to The Hague. The warrant holds that Galant, along with Netanyahu, bear responsibility for the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare. The crimes against humanity of murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts, as well as the war crime of intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population. The landmark warrant means the world will be a smaller place for the Israeli Prime Minister and former Defense Minister, with heads of state from Canada, France, Italy, and Ireland, to name a few, today reacting to the news by saying they would abide by the ruling. Here at home, however, it sets a collision course between the ICC and Trump's Republicans. His incoming U.S. National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz, today vowing a strong response to ICC's, quote, anti-Semitic bias. Waltz had previously raised the threat of sanctions against the ICC. Joining me now is Ayman Mohyeldin, host of Ayman on MSNBC. So in short, what does this mean for Benjamin Netanyahu and his relationship with the EU?
Well, in short, it means his world just got that much smaller. There are now 124 countries he cannot visit, including major European allies. And it makes him a pariah, not only in these countries, but also on the international stage. His allyship, on a bilateral level, it may not change much, but it means the countries that are still going to bilaterally stand with Israel, and specifically with this prime minister, are now doing so against an indicted war criminal, alleged war criminal, according to the ICC. And it just means that Israel now continues down this, along with the United States, continues down this isolationist road, defying international law and basically challenging the international rules-based system as to whether or not it's going to withstand this.
And the thing is, I'm glad you said "and the United States," because the United States sort of stands out among the Western nations in saying we reject this, including the Biden administration.
Right.
So if Donald Trump, for instance, decides to host a state dinner with Bibi Netanyahu, what does that do to the United States' relationship with the West?
Look, nobody who knows or watches the U.S. relationship with Israel is surprised by the fact that the United States continues to shun international legitimacy to stand alongside Israel. It's not only when it comes to the ICC. Literally this week, the United States vetoed for the fourth time a UN Security Council resolution that called for a ceasefire and the release of hostages that was supported by 14 countries, with the U.S. only country vetoing it. It's the fourth time something like this has happened. So the United States continues to bankroll Israel, continues to support what is being called a genocide in Gaza. And it's taking Israel down this very dark road where both the United States and Israel continue to isolate themselves, continue to undermine international rules and international norms. And it's basically not only hurting the international order, but also hurts America's objectives in other places like Ukraine, where this current president, Joe Biden, has come out and said he welcomed and supported the ICC's indictment and arrest warrants that were issued against Vladimir Putin, now has to turn around and say, no. This very same court that we praised and celebrated and recognized for what it's doing vis-a-vis Ukraine and Russia, now we suddenly think doesn't have jurisdiction, is not legitimate, and we're going to do whatever we can in our power to hinder its work.
I recently interviewed the foreign minister from South Africa, which seems quite vindicated in having pressed its case against the way that the Netanyahu government is operating this war in Gaza. They are now looking at a potential expansion of the United Nations Security Council to include African nations, non-voting, of course. But it does feel like there's a somewhat of a realignment. The Global South has spoken here and has been successful against a very powerful opponent, the United States.
Yeah, I mean, look, for several years now, this is not new, but for several years, the United States has become increasingly alone in the way that it is completely bankrolling Israel with this guise that Israel can do no wrong. Because the issue ultimately is, if you ask American officials, what has Israel done wrong? They simply will not say that Israel has done anything wrong. So what is kind of gaslighting the world, and certainly the global South, is on one hand, the U.S. lectures the global South and lectures countries that have dubious human rights records about the importance of international law and accepting human rights and following these norms. But when evidence is presented that is overwhelming in the eyes of countries like South Africa, the ICJ, the ICC, they look at it, and even now bodies at the UN who are saying there's overwhelming evidence that genocide is taking place in Gaza. Israeli experts have come out and said this. Genocide scholars have come out and said this. And the United States continues to say Israel is doing no wrong. When you even see politicians like Bernie Sanders and others say, hey, maybe let's condition our weapon sales to Israel, make sure that they comply with American law, not international law, American law, it gets shot down. And I think people in the global South are looking at this and saying, this is the height of American hypocrisy.
And we could go on, because this did impact the U.S. election in many ways, and, and it's going to get materially worse down this road with the Trump administration in place. Emma, go ahead,